friends. So happy that you're here. This service is energized. I'm excited already. If everyone's awake, our 9 o'clock, I love it. But everyone's a little sleepy. We're a little bit more energized this morning. I'm a fan. I'm so happy that you're here. So happy that I get to be with you this morning. Kevin and I have had a little bit of an ongoing joke the last couple weeks that my announcements have just kept getting longer and longer and longer. And I just like to talk to you. I miss you guys, right? I just want to talk to you. And he made a joke. He was like, I could just not show up one Sunday and you could just do an extended announcements. So welcome. This is going to be really fun. No, that's just a joke. I could do that. I really think I could talk about all the things going on here because I just get excited about it. I think it's important. But today is planned. Stamper family is having a much deserved and needed just break as a family. And so we're always so grateful to this community, the volunteers that always step up, and the band and everyone that just makes it happen for us to be able to prioritize rest, both for Kevin and his family and for myself when I'm gone. And it's just such a gift that we're a community that values that and prioritizes that. So I think they're like off kayaking today, which is awesome. So they're just having a nice time as a family. But we are not going to just do an extended version of the announcements. We're going to continue with the Grassroots Gospel series. But today, as I was thinking about it, we actually are going to kind of talk about the why behind the announcements. We're coming up on Acts 2, which if you're familiar with Acts 2, we're going to be talking a lot about community today, which is perfect. I love to talk about community, so this is ideal. But it's kind of like the why behind all the things I come up here every week to share with you. The why behind all the things that we do, the events that we have, community groups, all of that. Why do we do these things? Because we believe we're created for community. We believe it's better to do life together. And so that's why we offer these things to help you get plugged in. Not to just add more to your calendar, but to help you experience community and relationships with other people. And so as I was thinking about this, I was like, man, what kind of a weird time to talk about community, right? We're in a time where we're being asked to remain a little bit distant from one another, right? And for safety and care for one another, we have to remain some safe distance. We have to wear masks, right? There are things that we're doing out of care and love for others that does create some physical distance, right? And so community looks different right now than it has in the past, right? And so when I was thinking about it, I was like, what a weird time to talk about this. But as I was praying about it, God was just reminding me, like, this is the most important time to talk about this. In a time where there is marked by isolation, a time that is marked by division, we need to talk more about why we need each other. We need to talk more about how important it is for us to have connection, specifically in this time. And I would say we need to talk about how we need to fight for it when it's hard and when it's not convenient. And even beyond the reality of the coronavirus, right? Coronavirus has impacted so much of how we do community. Professionals and mental health counselors and people have been researching this long before this, right? People have said that isolation, loneliness, not having close relationships is an epidemic of health. It is estimated that your mortality rate increases by 30% if you do not have close relationships, if you lack connection in your life. 30%. That's on par with smoking. That's on par with substance abuse. And so you could say that being isolated, not being connected with people, not being in community is as dangerous as smoking, is as dangerous as using drugs. And so even if we look outside of this current reality that we're in, it's a conversation that we need to be having. It's a conversation that is so important. And I don't know about you, like in this season, I've been constantly reminded how much we crave community, right? How much we need it. Because if you turn on the TV, I don't know if you've noticed, any sort of commercial is like something about like we're apart but we're together. Personally, the Apple commercial just like makes me bawl. Go watch it. It's delightful. If you need a good cry, go on, watch it. It reminds me of like the Publix Christmas commercials. Anybody else? Those make me cry. I'm kind of a crier though, I get it. Not everyone is, but there's something about like one of those commercials that's just like Christmas and friends and family. I'm done for. But these commercials are reminding us of why we need each other, right? Or maybe you've seen people standing outside of windows to see their loved ones that they can't be physically close with right now. Or maybe you've seen parades drive through your neighborhood. Maybe you've seen a restoration parade drive through your neighborhood because we miss you, right? We're craving connection. And so we are seeing more and more in this season just how important it is. And so today we get to look at an example from the early church. Now the early church did community beautifully. I'm not going to say it was perfect, right? We're all human, we make mistakes, but there are beautiful picture of community for us to look at in the book of Acts. And so we're going to spend all of our time today in Acts 2, verses 42 through 47. And we're going to spend all of our time breaking it down because there's so much packed in to these verses. So what I'm going to do first is we're going to break it down, but I want to read the whole thing for you because I want you to just picture it. I want you to sit in it and just really experience what is happening in this community. Try to put yourself in it. Try to picture it, okay? So if you have your Bibles, great. If not, it's on the screens behind you, in front of you, behind me. Acts 2, 42 through 47. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship, and to the breaking of bread and to prayer. Everyone was filled with awe at the many wonders and signs performed by the apostles. All of the believers were together and had everything in common. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people. And the Lord added to their number those who were being saved. Okay, so we see this. It's just a beautiful picture of community, right? And I want to, just right from the get-go, I know it may be easy to read this and be like, well, we can't necessarily gather in homes right now, or we can't do this, or things look different. But I want to challenge us to think outside of the box a little bit today. Let's look at the heart of what this community is doing, and what does it look like to pursue this in today's context, in tomorrow's context, and whatever, right? Our lives are going to change, our circumstances are going to change, but the community and the life that God has called us to does not change, right? It may look different, but being in community, being in relationships, and pursuing this does not change. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So I want you to kind of think outside of the box with me and not be like, well, I can't go to this person's house right now. Okay, we're going to talk about that. What does that look like right now? So let's break it down. We're going to start with, right at the beginning, 42. It says they devoted themselves. Okay, so let's focus on the word devoted. We're not going to go too far yet. Devoted. We know what the word devoted means. We kind of have an understanding of that. But I want us to really understand the strength of this word. Because when I was doing some research, even a more accurate translation or further translations of this would be constantly there or persisting. Devoted, constantly there, and persisting. Now, when I hear the word persisting, what comes to my mind is even in the face of obstacles, right? You persist. Even when it's hard, even when it's not convenient, you persist, you choose it, you're constantly there. Also, this word devoted here, this word is the same word that is used when we describe the disciples' commitment to prayer. So in Scripture, when it says the disciples were devoted to prayer, this is the same meaning, the same word in the Greek being used here. So it shows just the strength behind it. It's not just that they enjoyed it or they chose it. They were constantly there. They persisted. They were devoted to it. So we see that it's a priority. It was a priority for the early church. God calls it to be a priority for us. But sometimes I think in our own minds, whether we maybe admit that we do this or not, sometimes we maybe don't even notice. Sometimes we can say, well, it's a priority for people, right? People that like people. And you could say, hey, Janessa, you're an extrovert, because I am a little bit, a lot. You could say, it's easier for you. You like to be with people all the time. I'm not a people person. I'm an introvert, right? And I'll give you that. I will say that it can be easier for me to make the choice towards community. Right? There aren't very many times in my life where I'm like, I need alone time. Sometimes I have to force myself to have alone time because that's also important. But there aren't many times in my life where I would choose that. And so I hear the introverts in the room that are like, that's my preference, my first choice. But one thing that I've actually learned a ton from Kevin and I's working relationship is quite fun because I am as far as you can get on the extrovert scale, and he is really far on the introvert scale. You may not know this about Kevin, but Kevin is one of the most introverted humans I know. And so that makes our working environment quite fun, right? Because we'll be working together, and I'm like, team, let's do everything. Let's talk about every decision, and I just want to talk all the time. And he is great, and we work together. But he'll be like, okay, I just need it to be quiet for a second. Or I'll be like, Janessa, I need you to not sing for a second, which I didn't know I did that, guys. I did not know I did that I just constantly have a hum. Jewel knows. Jewel comes to our office, and they'll be like, Janessa, you got to stop with the song, and I won't even know that I'm singing. So there's just a little window. It's nothing to do with what we're talking about. A little window into our office life. But what I respect so much about Kevin is that he is very honest that he would choose alone time over people if he had the choice. But it's a discipline for him to choose community. He has made it a discipline because he knows that it's better. He knows that he needs it. And I've watched Kevin do this time and time again, right? He chooses community sometimes better than anyone I know. I would say he chooses relationship, pours into relationship beautifully but it is not always his natural choice. It's a discipline. It's something that he values. And he knows that it's important because he knows that he's created for it, right? This goes back to Genesis 2, right from the beginning, when we see all the things that God creates. It says God creates the heavens and the earth, and it's good. And he lists all these things that he creates, and it says it's good, it's good, it's good. And then it says that he created man, and it says that it's not good. Kind of awkward, right? So we have to ask questions like, well, why is it not good? Is it a quality issue? Is it an issue with men? No. Everyone calm down. No, right? We know it's not a quality issue. It's a quantity issue. It says that it's not good for man to be alone. It's a quantity issue. We were not created for it. It is not good. We also know that God is in community, right? There's the Father, the Son, and the Spirit. Trinity, 3 in 1 all the time. God is always in community. And we are created in God's image, which sometimes I love when I get reminded of that. How cool is that? How cool is that God would create us in his image? Then as we get to know each other, we actually even get to know the image of God better. We get to learn about each other. Like how, that's just, not what we're talking about, but I just think it is very fun and just incredible that God would do that. But if we're created in God's image and God is in community, then we are created to live in community. We're wired for it, right? And we talk about that at Restoration all the time because it's the foundation of why we do what we do, right? And if you've been around Restoration Beginnings, if you've taken it, you know that we list out all the one another's in the Bible on paper, and it's a very long list of all the ways we're called to love one another, challenge, encourage, all the different things. It's all over Scripture. Another thing that I love, I just had a conversation with a friend from seminary about this yesterday. We were talking about the book of Ephesians. And sometimes when we read the book of Ephesians, there's tons in there about just how to live life, how to follow Jesus, so much good stuff. And it's often addressed to you. It says, like, you do this, you do this, you do this. Well, actually, just because of the complications of translation in the English language, often that you is more like a y'all. It's supposed to be plural. And so it's really talking to the community. It's a y'all, it's not a you. And so if we read a scripture, and we read certain scriptures through the lens of y'all, also I've decided I want to start saying y'all. Can I pull it off? I'm from the Pacific Northwest. You can be honest, maybe not. But I'm trying to be a person that says y'all. So just run with me with that from now on. But it's a plural. It's a y'all. Okay, so we understand that seeking community is important because we're created for it. But then why do we resist it so often? Right? Why when things get tough, when things get hard, often, not all the time, but often we kind of take a step back. There have been times in my life that I have been in a tough situation, and the easier thing was to kind of just withdraw. So why do we do that? I think there's a lot of reasons, right? There's a lot of reasons that we withdraw from community. But the one I hear the most from people is that, one, my stuff is just too messy or too hard or too much of a burden to put on someone else. I hear that all the time. I'm pretty sure probably every single person in this room has either felt that once or said it, right? It's too much. I can't let someone else into this. It's too much on them. I don't want to burden them. It's too messy. Or just a desire to be independent, right? And I'm not saying this is always bad, so hear me out. But I think our culture often tells us that independence is better. It's better to be able to do something yourself. You're strong if you can handle it yourself, right? We start to see needing other people as a weakness. And I think that has just been ingrained in us from our culture. But as I've learned about other cultures and had time to spend time in other cultures, that is not across the board, right? That is not everywhere. I'm not saying it's only America, but it is definitely not everywhere. Before I moved to Florida, I got to live in Haiti for like 6 months, and I had spent a lot of time in Haiti. Before I moved here, I got to spend a little bit more of a condensed time there. Now, I think you need to be somewhere a whole lot longer to really understand the culture and to be immersed into it. But it was incredible to be able to take 6 months to just really learn the culture and learn from my friends there and be able to spend time serving there. And I learned so much from that time there. It was life-changing. But a couple of things that I learned the most was just some cultural differences. And my friends in Haiti, they would tease me all the time. They'd say, well, Janessa, you're from a cold culture, and we're from a hot culture. They would tease me all the time. They're like, you're from a cold culture, which means you're structured and you're on time and you're independent and you don't know how to share. That's what they would tell me. Now, they were teasing, right? We were just messing with each other. They're like, in hot cultures, we're flexible. We live life in community. We share everything that we have. And I had seen them live this out. A friend of mine had been given a substantial donation to go to school and to just do some different things. And we asked him, like, what are you going to do with this money? And he said, well, yeah, I do want to go to school, but my neighbor needs this, and my aunt needs this, and my mom needs this, and our neighborhood, just list went on. And it was clear that money was going to be gone real quick, right? But it was just ingrained in his mindset of, like, this is how we do life. We care for one another. We meet needs. And the jokes would go on and on. Like, one time I showed up to a wedding on time, and it was like 3 hours later that it started, and all of my friends were like, Janessa, you never come to a Haitian wedding until it goes 2 to 3 hours until after it was supposed to start. So we would just constantly mess with each other. But I learned so much and so much value in that culture of just people being actually living life together and caring for one another, and not just a cliche of saying it, but living it out with their resources and their time and just their perspective. And so often we have this kind of resistance because our culture tells us we have to do it by ourselves. But although this is very cliche, I know, but I think that we realize, and especially in this season we're realizing it, is that life is much too heavy, much too hard to do it by ourselves. Right? We hear that all the time. It almost kind of becomes like white noise because that's just something we hear. But I think we also know that it is true. Right? It's too much. It's too hard to do on our own. And that's not because we're weak. It's because we were not created to do it alone. So it's not going to go well, right? If you try to do it alone, yeah, it's probably going to be a hot mess because we were not wired for it. We were not designed to do it that way. In this reality that COVID has brought into our lives, we have sat with many of you that have just had unbearable losses. Losses of jobs, losses of just what even you expected this season to look like, losses of end of school years, graduations, losses of just all the things that are normally markers and celebrations. Also, loss of loved ones. We have members in our community that have lost family members to COVID. We have members in our community that have lost family members to other things like cancer, but COVID has robbed them of the opportunity to say goodbye, the opportunity to attend a funeral for their family. This is a heartbreaking season, and we've sat with people in tears and sitting and processing these losses. And something that I've been so proud of our community is, one, watching all of you love and surround people, but even more than that, watching people that are in that moment, in that hurt and broken moment, choose community, choose to reach out, choose to send the text message, choose to make the phone call, choose to get on Zoom. And one person that comes to mind, and I got her permission to share a little bit of her story, is our friend Tammy. Tammy has been in our women's group for a while. She started coming consistently kind of at the start of quarantine, and we've been meeting on Zoom before we started to transition back into homes. And in the early set of this, she lost her brother to cancer. Now, he had been battling cancer for a while, but it took them by surprise. It came up much quicker than they imagined it would. And it made it where she couldn't fly to go say goodbye. She couldn't have a funeral. Her family still has not been able to have a service where they could all be together. They're all separated across the country from each other, and they're trying to grieve this loss without the ways that we are used to grieving. The things in our culture that we're used to doing together, right? They have had to do those things differently. And the thing that I have been so proud about for Tammy is that from the moment this happened, she has chosen the better. She has chosen to choose community and to let other people in. And what I would say is, not only is it better, but it's harder. Like, she has chosen the harder thing, because how convenient would have it been to just step back, right? We're not meeting in person. We weren't meeting in person in church, so no one's going to notice that you're not there at church, right? How easy is it to just not log on? How convenient is it to just step back, right? In any season, this would be the easiest one to isolate. But she decided to push past convenience, to push past it and choose community, because she knows that she needed it. And friends, she has been vulnerable and honest and has entered into our space and our community with whatever day she's having that day. And I have just been thankful and proud, and it has been an example for all of us. And I've got to watch our women's group and our church at large surround her and care for her. And it has been such a beautiful example. Tammy chose the better thing. Now, these are much more serious examples, right? We're in a season where we're just surrounded by heartbreaking examples. But can we lighten it for just a second and talk about also that it's just not as much fun to do life alone, right? Even if you're introverted, I would argue that you would still prefer to have people around. Gary's nodding, yes, right? You would still prefer people even if you're introverted. Because have you ever been on a roller coaster on your own? Solo rider? Horrible, right? No one wants to do that. I did that once. And it was a very sad experience. It was a very sad experience for me because, one, I just like people in general. But you go on this roller coaster. Now, granted, I had a fast pass. So, you can't not. If you have a fast pass and no one else in your group does, I mean, come on. You got to go on the roller coaster, right? I went to Disney when you were still allowed to, do things and go to Disney. It was a fun time, right? So back when those things still were happening, my mom and my stepdad were in town, and I was like, oh, I live in Florida now. I'll take them to Disney. This will be great. So we're having a great day at Disney. It was lovely. But there's this new roller coaster called the Slinky Dog roller coaster. And to be fair, I think it's for kids. But it is the most joyful experience. I love it so much. And it was new, and I got a fast pass for it. It's hard to get fast pass for new rides. And my parents were not as excited about the Slinky Dog roller coaster. I don't understand why. But whatever. They weren't excited about it. So they're like, we're going to go get some food. And you can go on this roller coaster. I was like, fine, great. So I get there. Never done this by myself before. There is a line for only single riders. There is a line specifically for people who are by themselves. Already doesn't feel great, right? You're already like, okay, I got to go in this line by myself. But naive Janessa is thinking, oh, they're going to pair us up. You can make a new friend. Another single rider, Janessa, we're going to pair. No, guys, no. You ride by yourself. That makes no sense. Why even have a single rider line and then to make you ride by yourself? It's crazy. So all the single riders get their own little car, putting your hands in the air, having a great time, and then they also take a picture of it at the end to remind you. There's a whole skit that a guy named Ryan Hamilton does about this very thing on Netflix. If you like comedy, please go watch it. It's hilarious. But they take a picture of your lonely moment. And of course, she has the hands in the air, and everyone's got their people around them. I'm not going to say I didn't enjoy the ride, because I did, but it would have been way better screaming next to a friend that was also screaming their head off, as I do on a roller coaster. All right, so we can recognize that it is just more fun with other people. So this early church, they devoted themselves. What did they devote themselves to? The teaching, to the fellowship, to the breaking of bread, and to prayer. Okay, there's so much to unpack even in that. We're not going to have time to go into all of it. But they're devoting themselves to the teaching. So yes, they are learning from each other. They're learning from the apostles. But it's a whole picture. It's so much beyond sitting in these rows and listening to teaching. So they're breaking their bread, right? And later in the passage it talks about, gathering in homes and all of that. Now, breaking of bread, they could be specifically talking about communion, which they probably are, but they're also talking about actually sharing meals together and just being in homes. Homes in the early church was one of the greatest tools of discipleship. The early church happened in homes. And that's why we talk about this so much. We talk about how we love what happens in these rows, but we much prefer what happens in living rooms and around tables, because that's where life is lived, and that's where the early church thrived. Now we're gonna get back to this, but I know right now gatherings look different. So please don't write this off as well, we can't do that right now. Right, we're gonna get into that too. But the reality is just sitting in rows, listening to teaching is great, but it is not what we were created for. It's not what the early church modeled for us. But what I want to fixate on is this word fellowship. Okay, so in so we're still just in verse 42. We're moving quick, guys. It says, devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship and to the breaking the bread of prayer. Okay, so I was not raised in church. I had not heard the word fellowship before. So once I finally did, I didn't go to a church that had a fellowship hall or anything like that when I did come to know Jesus and attend a church. So the first time I was in a church and I heard the word fellowship, they were like, we're all going to go into the fellowship hall. Now, if this is your church background, promise, I'm not trying to offend anyone. Totally okay. Just telling you my experience. They're like, we're going to go in the fellowship hall. I was like, what happens there? What is that? What is a fellowship hall? What are you guys going to do in there? I was like, that's weird, right? Because I'd never heard this word. In what other context do you hear the word fellowship? Have you ever heard someone that's not a Christian use the word fellowship? No, right? No one says, I could really feel the fellowship in the room. No. No one says, I was fellowshipping so hard last night. No one says that. That'd be weird, right? So I'm not saying it's a bad word. I'm saying that it's a churchy word, right? And so sometimes we just say words like this and we don't actually talk about what does that word mean. So the word fellowship, actually in the Greek, is koinonia. And that word means sharing and intimacy. It means joint participation. It means every single person has something to offer. Every single person has a seat at the table. Every single person is needed. It's sharing. It's intimate. When I hear this, it reminds me of like the example of it takes a village to raise a child. Like you hear people talk about that, of needing other people around your family. It's that. It takes everyone at the table. It takes everyone to be able to come together and to support one another. It's this idea of collective wisdom, right? Maybe you are in a marriage or a dating relationship and you invite someone in and say, hey, I need other couples, other people to speak into this. We need to learn from one another. And friends, in just where we're at in our world right now, I would say collective wisdom is something that we need the most, right? This is a time more than ever to press into someone else's experience, to say, hey, could you tell me about what you've experienced? Can I learn from you? Because just as we were talking about, we're created in the image of God, so we get to learn from other people created in the image of God. We get to learn even more about who he is and how good he is, right? So as we press in and we learn from one another, that's at the heart of this fellowship. That's the heart of this word, of everyone having something to offer, whether it's resources, time, talent, bringing it together for the greater good, for the community, focusing on other people. Because we see that this community is very others-focused, right? We're going to read on and we're going to see it's very others-focused. It's very self-sacrificing. Okay, so we read on. We've got 44, okay? All the believers were together and had everything in common. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. Okay, so we can read this, and that can sound kind of extreme, right? Like it's kind of extreme. Everyone's just making it work, finding a need, meeting it. What we see in this is it's completely self-sacrificing, right? It's not a self-serving community. It's one that comes in and says, hey, what can I do for this community, not just what can I get out of it? What can I come in and be a part of, not just stand by and consume and watch? Because one, that's just what this community was wired to do, but also we're wired to take part, right? We're wired to take part of community and not just sit by and watch it. To me, this is a community that chooses to be looking at others and choosing self-sacrifice even when it's not convenient. Right? I was in a conference, virtual conference a couple days ago, and one of the speakers said that that convenience is the enemy of compassion. That convenience is the enemy of compassion. And man, it struck me, one, so much for this season that we're in, because I feel like I'm seeing a lot of that in our world right now. We're fighting for convenience and it's getting in the way of our compassion for other people. But when I heard it, I was brought right back to this passage. And maybe it's because I've been studying it all week, it's been on my mind, but I was thinking, wow, I think this early church, this group of believers, was choosing compassion over convenience, choosing community over convenience. Because you think it's easy to share everything, to seek out needs, to figure out what people need, pull it together, make it happen. Like that doesn't sound convenient at all. Right? It really doesn't. It actually sounds quite challenging. And also, if we think about how big of a group this group is, it says that the Lord is adding to their number every day. But even in the passage beforehand, it says that just the day before, it was 3,000 people were added. So we're talking about the group that was already established, this group of Jesus followers. 3,000 are added, and the Lord is adding to their number every single day. So this is no just teeny 10 people group of just saying, hey, we're going to help each other. No, this is a movement of people that is self-sacrificing and putting the needs of others above themselves. So many of you know that I work in the church with Kevin and Joel, and it's the best. And also in some of my hours, I also work as a social worker at an elementary school. So I get to work with kindergarten through 5th graders, and they are so fun and sassy all at the same time. It's the best. So I get to spend a lot of my hours during the week with them. And during my school year, basically my challenge of last year and this year is to help kids look at other people, is to help kids think beyond themselves. That's kind of been the challenge that my boss has given me this year. Because professionals, now this is just heartbreaking to me that this even gets talked about, but professionals are saying right now that we're in an empathy crisis. An empathy crisis. Isn't that heartbreaking? Oh, I hate it. I hate hearing it. Saying that we are in a crisis of a time where people cannot see beyond themselves. And so I'm in conferences all the time about how do we teach kids empathy, right? Empathy is being able to see and understand other people's feelings, right? To be able to recognize them and to be able to put yourself in that place and to share the feelings of another. And so they said, we need to start figuring out how do we help kids see that. And so one of the things we do in what's called an enrichment room, they come in for activities and things, and we try to do some social and emotional learning. So they know that when they come into my room, when we first started this, there was a poster on the wall that says, "What 2 kind things did you do today?" 2 kind things. They didn't have to answer, but they know that Miss Janessa is going to say, "Hey, does anyone want to share the 2 kind things that they did today?" And when we started, it was a great place to start. They would come in and they would say, "Oh, I picked up a piece of trash," or "I held the door open for someone." But then we realized that we were asking the wrong question. We didn't want them to just think about doing kind things, because acts of kindness are great, but sometimes we can do acts of kindness apart from the need of a person. And we just think, well, this would be a kind thing, and we don't actually think about what someone needs. And so we started asking a different question. On the poster now it says, what's one thing you did for another person today? What did you do for others today? And changing that question allowed them to start thinking, okay, what does someone else need right now? What do I see right now as a need, and how could I meet it? It gets them thinking about another person. And so then when we asked that question, it allowed us to have conversations of like, well, I saw my friend that looked sad on the playground today, so I went and talked to them. Right? It got them to think beyond themselves, actually looking at the needs for other people. And so I've watched my students navigate this. I've been so proud of them. I've watched them navigate this, start to have these conversations, seek empathy. And as I've been working on this message, I just keep coming back to, I think that this early church was rooted in empathy, right? Being able to see one another, being able to see the needs and share resources and address it, that comes from a place of compassion and understanding. That comes from a place of pushing aside convenience and choosing compassion. This movement was growing rapidly, right? And people are getting added to the number. And I think part of that, we're going to talk about that it's God's doing, the Lord is doing it, but part of it is because this is attractive, right? I had a seminary professional that used to always say that the gospel is attractive. And I loved that, but I don't know that I fully understand what he meant. Like, I was like, okay, yeah, it's like Jesus died for you. Like, that's pretty attractive. That's amazing. But he would talk about how this gospel was attractive because people would be invited into community, invited into a space where then they had an opportunity to witness transformed lives. They would be invited into community and with the opportunity then to see what Jesus had done in other people. And that is attractive. The gospel change that happened in people's lives, the transformation, is attractive to people looking in. And so I think that this is spreading like wildfire because this attractive gospel is based in this love and compassion, and people are seeing one another and caring for one another because their lives have been transformed. But we do see, as we wrap up the verse, that it's God's doing, right? It says that every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people. And the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. So we learn a couple things from the end here. One, it's radically inclusive. This community, there was always room for one more. Like we talked about, this community is already huge, and there's room for another, right? Sometimes we get in the mindset that in order to have deep and authentic community, it only has to be a few. Now, there are examples where Jesus had close relationships with different people. I'm not saying you shouldn't have closer relationships than another. But the idea that only vulnerable and thriving and healthy community can happen when it's closed off, just a few, is not biblical. It's not true. This community is growing and it's thriving. But we also learn from this that God is the evangelist. God is the one that's adding to their number. Now, God has invited this group of believers and us too in, and he's using gifts and talents and opened homes and all that fun stuff to do this. But God is the one that's adding to their number. It's not their fancy preaching. It's not their skills. It's the Lord. But how is exciting is even with that, knowing that, we get invited into this process, that God would choose to use us, to partner with us. Wow, it's just incredible. So we have this example of a thriving, growing, sacrificing community that we too are invited into. So as we start to wrap up, I want us to think about what that looks like right now. Because I know it doesn't look exactly like it does in Acts in our current context. But my fear is that we're going to use that as an excuse to disengage. I don't want that for us. I don't want that for our church. Who knows what's going to happen, whether we get to stay in person, whether we go online. Nobody knows, right? We don't know what the season is going to look like. But I do know that regardless, we've been called to a community that cares for one another and that presses in difficult times. And so, friends, that might look like picking up the phone. That might look like getting on Zoom when you don't want to. That might look like coming into a gathering like this. And maybe soon we'll be able to be in homes together. Like, all of those things might happen. But I want you to think tangibly of what does it look like for you, one, to pursue community like this and also to invite somebody else in. And I, so tangibly that I would love to, if you sent me a text or an email or something this week and shared with me your one step towards community, I would love to hear that, would be thrilled. Because I don't want us to leave here just thinking, yeah, community, go do it. No, let's talk about how do we take a step closer to it. Because I do think that right now, if we let it, this season could teach us so much of what it looks like to sit in really hard things with people. It could teach us so much of what it looks like to bring unity in a time of division, to bring connection in a time of isolation. It could teach us so much about what it looks like to rejoice with people, to grieve with people, even though it's not convenient, right? Right now, community is not convenient. It isn't. It looks different than how we've done it in the past. Excuse me, but we have to push past that and choose it anyways. One person that I think does this beautifully, our friend Kelly, she was playing the drums. When we were meeting on Zoom for a while, she would joke about, I just hate Zoom. I hate being on a screen. She'd hate it. And to be honest, it's not my favorite either. Leading community group on Zoom is not my favorite. But what I loved is that Kelly would choose it every single week. And she'd be honest. She'd be like, man, I just hate this. Not group itself, being on Zoom. But she would leave group and she would say, oh, I'm so glad that I came on because I still got something out of it, right? I needed the connection. I needed to be with people. She pushed back what would be convenient is after work, turning her computer screen off and going about her evening. That would be convenient. That's the easier choice. But she would push past that every single week because she knew that it mattered. And so that's a simple example, but that's what I want you to think about this week. I want to think about what it looks like for you. Who do you need to call? Who do you need to reach out to? Who do you need to invite in? And where do you need to take an honest step towards community? And maybe that's also just even being honest about what you're feeling in this season. Right? We've talked about this a lot. It's okay. It's hard. It's okay if you're having a hard time because it is a hard season and we want to process that with you. And there's a community that's ready to process that with you. And maybe it's for you needing to figure out how you are being asked to serve sacrificially in this season. Where does God want to use you? I'm so proud of the church that we are. The fact that we serve every second Saturday, the fact that we're going to go serve another church in Tampa that is in need of help right now, that's who we are, right? And I want to invite you into that as well. I'm so thankful for this community. I'm so thankful for the way that God has continued to show up and use us in the ways that we can love and care for one another as we choose compassion and community over convenience. So I would love to hear what you're processing this week. I would love to hear about your tangible next steps. Send me a text, email, phone call. Would love to talk to you. I'm going to pray for us, and then you can go about your week. God, we thank you so very much for this opportunity to be in this space together, to be able to worship, to be able to learn from one another, and to learn more about you as we learn from one another and about each other. God, I pray that in this season, you would help us know how to press in. Whatever that looks like for each of us, God, I ask that you would speak individually to every person in this room and watching online of their next step to pursue into community, take a step deeper. God, I believe that in this season of isolation and division that we could learn so much more about who you are. God, we have an opportunity to learn about what it looks like to grieve and to mourn and to rejoice with our brothers and our sisters. And God, we ask that you would show us how to do it. God, I pray that even when things are not convenient, that you would help us fight that, fight convenience, and choose compassion and community every time. That in a time where community doesn't get to look like this passage in Acts, it looks a little different right now, that we would not use that as an excuse to disengage, but that it would make us even crave it more. God, that's been my prayer since day one of this, that we would be so craving and so missing community that it would draw us even deeper, that we would come out of this season knowing one another better, knowing you better. So God, would you help us to do that? I'm so thankful for your faithfulness and your goodness, that no matter what we face each day, that you remain faithful. that we can always come back to the truth of who you are and how good you are to us. We thank you for that. God, I pray over each person here that they would be able to go into their week. God, that you would use each of us to bring you glory, that you would use us to bring your kingdom of heaven to earth in tangible ways this week. We thank you for the privilege it is to partner with you. We love you, and we pray this all in Jesus' name. Amen. Hey, thank you so much for being here, friends. We love having you. If you want to swing by Allie Klingenpeel's little grad party, it's in the cafeteria. We hope that you'll join us for Second Saturday Serve, and hope you have a great week.
Wow.